Uday, the page number is 407. Madhye Madhye Purnadasha Sadhana Nirvrita Api Tesham Yasa Pashudasha Sadvimarshantaralaga Nabandhanaya Bhavati Dakthara Jurrivastita. Though they are free from care on account of attaining the whole state of undivided consciousness, repeatedly in the middle, their state similar to an animal or ordinary human being, which exists in the interval between investigations into reality or the self leading to absorption in it, does not bring about bondage and remains like a burnt robe, which cannot bind anybody.
So, the topic under discussion are these three stages or states of jnanam, of wisdom: lowest, middling, and the highest. So the lowest are those who have intermittent knowledge. When they're investigating into the self, they do self-inquiry, everything falls away and they remember, oh, I am that partless Brahman. But because of the force of past impressions, vasanas, they are not people of steady wisdom. They're not sthita purusha. When the ego arises again, they suffer like any other fool. But their knowledge then returns again. And they go, oh, I got so identified. What a fool. God. So here the scripture is saying, don't worry. Those moments where it takes the mind, they're blasted away when knowledge returns. So, the mark of the person of wisdom is they've given up kartavya, obligatory actions, struggling. If I'm in this yo-yo state, what should I do? Shankara addresses this in Viveka Chudamani. He says, even after realization of the truth, there exists a strong impression that one is the doer and the enjoyer, which is the cause for rebirth. Here it means re-identification. This needs to be conscientiously rooted out through steady and continuous identification with the annihilation of the vasanas here and now is considered liberation by the wise. So how much tapas you want to do, how much of that karta and bhokta you want to root out, that's up to you. But you can have steady wisdom, Shankara says. Any thoughts? This is very subtle teaching here.
Jim, I didn't get this last, sorry, I didn't get the last part which you said, how much tapas you do is up to you. Is that what you said?
It's up to you. Are you satisfied with the state of your mind?
Right, okay.
If it's afflicting you and you're uncomfortable with it getting re-identified and you're getting triggered, do more tapas. You know, ultimately, everybody follows their own journey. I will not give you an enlightenment certificate. Each person does their own path, does their own sadhana. The way I looked at it is if you have moments where you know who you are, now you have something real with which to work. Before that, it's just Shraddha, it's just faith. All right, going on.
Lakshara vastra pranta yugmam suranjitam yaptaya vasomadhyamapi sarvam laksharunam bhavet evam tasya riti sorry evam tasya Vyavahritischcha Damarshana Madhyaga Chitrupatme Katam Yata Na Tato Bandhanayasa. When the pair of borders of a cloth is well colored with the juices of lac or red dye obtained from the resin of a particular tree, even the entire middle of the cloth would become red with the dye by pervasion. Thus, his actions, existing in the middle of investigations into consciousness and absorption in it, attain to oneness with the self of the nature of consciousness. Therefore, they do not bring about bondage.
So the metaphor here is if you have a piece of white or a matte colored cloth and you put the end of it in a container with dye, by osmosis, isn't that what it would be? Brownian motion, I'm not sure what the chemistry is. In time, the whole cloth gets colored. So actually, don't worry if there are times that you get identified. Of course, to me, the greatest thing to do is quit trying to be a realized person. Endeavor to remember that you're Brahman. And in time, the knowledge of the self will pervade the whole mind. It will. Don't take your momentary lapses too seriously. I think the Buddhists call this being shot with the second arrow. The first arrow is my suffering when I get identified. The second arrow is, oh, I'm such a terrible yogi. I got all identified. That's 2 arrows of suffering. You can at least dispense with the second. And have faith. This is an evolution. It's an unfoldment. In the end, the yogi begins to apprehend that there's no yogi there doing the sadhana. It's all just being done. Helps us relax into the process. All right, next one.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So sometimes I've started realizing that any sadhana that I do, sometimes I have no free will. Sometimes it just happens. And sometimes I have to apply effort. But if what you just said is really true, like it's not the yogi doing sadhana or tapasya, it's happening, then is there any value to efforting in that direction?
I'm going to tell you a story. Some of you may have heard this. Once upon a time, there was a baby chick. And inside its egg, it was studying Vedanta. And it was very smug because It was thinking of all the other chicks who unnecessarily labor to peck themselves out of their shells. And it understood the scriptures, and it says, there's no need for me to work at this. It's all going to happen. There's no one there doing the hatching. God will do it all. And he laid back in the chick and just waited for this natural unfoldment. Well, in time, he continued to grow, and he continued to grow, and he began to think, God better hurry up. It's getting crowded in here. And then he continued to grow, and he continued to grow, and finally said, I can't stand it anymore. Pack, 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 pack. And he got himself out of the egg. Just like every other chick. So did he fail to surrender to the Dharma? But his very response to his sense of confinement impelled him. So too, your divine discontent will impel you into self-effort. Did you choose the self-effort? Are you catching the paradox? So, practically speaking, we experience making choices. The teaching on the renunciation of the sense of agency has its greatest value because it keeps us from regretting the past and worrying about the future. Oh, I made so many mistakes. I married the wrong person. I went to the wrong school. I took the wrong job. Nonsense. You did what you did and you could have done no other. Prarabdha. And then for the future, oh, I'm so worried that I'm going to make the wrong choice and take the wrong job or buy the wrong condo or da 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 da. Nonsense. You're going to do what you're going to do. But in the now, we experience the need to make choices. And our divine discontent moves us forward. Now, one of the things that's very interesting, if you study Sanskrit grammar, I've done very little of this, I've been told about this. Very little use of the active first person is used in literature. It's considered rude. Gachami vriksha, gachami vanam. I go to the forest. You would say, vanam gachate mai. The forest is gone to by me. It's polite. But there's a spiritual implication in the use of the passive voice. So you hear things translated, the desire for cities arose and so and so. So it's an acknowledgement that though it feels like I am doing, now, it arose in me and is being done by me and through me. Very subtle, interesting thing about grammar. Is that useful? Is it helpful?
Yeah.
If you like doing sadhana, do sadhana. If you're suffering, especially. it is theoretically possible to grow spiritually through inspiration. However, few of us do it. Why? Because if I'm stuck in my attachments and it's comfortable, who the heck wants to let go of it? Once I experience the pain, and I want to let go. Young people, get on the computer, get a hookup, a date. Really wonderful time. Go see the girl, go see the boy half a dozen times. Oh, this is great, this is great, this is great. And what's the term they use? Ghosting, is that right?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah.
That's when I've been blocked. Ah. Then you start wanting to do some tapas, see? Isn't that what happens to us? All right, next verse. Good question.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Certainly.
How does one grow through inspiration? In the same way as you might from pain.
There are those of us who love God. Our minds are just naturally, due to the punya in previous lives, we can't help it. Our minds, we can do no other but turn to God. The Ramakrishnas, the Anandamayi Mas, they're very rare souls. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, okay. Now I get what kind of inspiration you mean.
They don't necessarily have to suffer. They just yearn, they can't help it. God, God, God fills their lives. And some of us are on the spectrum. Sometimes we come to God out of inspiration and love, sometimes out of a response to our suffering. Next verse.
Matya vijnaninam deha samyogo nasti sarvatha dehatmatva graho deha samyogaha prochate buddhe sanasti matya vijnana vato rama kadachana. For the middling sages, possessed of knowledge, there is completely no association with the body. The notion of selfhood in the body is declared as association with the body by the wise. Rama, that does not exist at any time for middling sages who are possessed of knowledge.
So the middling sage never thinks they are the body. Under no circumstances, without effort, they have stita prajna, steady wisdom. Ramana Maharshi would use the example just like for ordinary people. You do not wake up in the morning and somehow think you're a goat or a cow or a horse or a pig, but you know you have a human body. It's obvious and it's effortless. So in the lowest class of jnani, they sometimes get identified. But in the middle class, they never get identified. That is the mark of a Jivan Mukta. This is a person of steady wisdom. Going on.
Abhyasatishaya tasya manolinam hi sarvada sada samahita swanto Yavaharo na tasya hi yo deha yatra nirvaha sopi tasya sushuktivat. For, on the account of the excellence of the practice, his mind would always be completely absorbed in the self. He has his mind in samadhi always and has no action. Even that which is the carrying on of the journey of the body in the world, which is his physical life, is like sleep for him.
So these are those who, because of intense tapas, have removed the mind. And these are those saints that we see who are fond of samadhi, who are immersed in samadhi, who don't cognize the world frequently. I remember Anandamayi Ma, they used to at times have to feed her like a child. She was so unaware of the physical world. Now, I want to draw your attention to this paradigm contrasted with the 7 stages of knowledge in Yoga Vasishtha. Because what this scripture calls the middle stage, Yoga Vasishtha calls the highest stage. So let me give you the final saying on stages of wisdom. Post-enlightenment samadhis are karmic. They are not to be achieved by will or effort. In fact, if you're struggling to have some sort of a samadhi that's a wackadoodle mind state, you're not a jnani yet. The mark of the jnani is they've given up on the struggle. They're content. This scripture will say the highest order of jnani is the person like Janaka who's active in the world. Whereas Yoga Vasishtha says, highest form of jnana is the person who can't even perceive the world. Don't worry about it. Your own prarabdha will take you where you need to go. So we see one sage who's active in the world. Maybe their samadhi's not as deep. When you come across another jnani and oh man, Shakti, whoa, is one more enlightened than the other? No. You either know the self or you don't. How deeply the mind can revel in that. Into that. And that is a result of punya, actions, merit accrued, lifetimes of sadhana. So the teaching is we accept this piece of equipment as it is. Obviously, the Lord has a need for it, or she wouldn't have made it. And if she wanted that piece of equipment to be a Ramakrishna or an Anandamayi Ma, that's where you'd be. So wherever we are, the point is Do you know your essential nature? When you quieten your mind and you introvert your attention, when you look behind your eyes, do you clearly and firmly know there's nobody there? Yet that no thing shines. It's Chidakasha. Space, pure consciousness. Now, if you get up in the morning, you just can't help yourself. You've got to meditate. It's a great blessing. But don't get hung up on it. Any thoughts or questions about this? Next verse.
Abhyasatishaya tasya. Oh, I think I did this one. Yatha kaschita sushuptis. Yatha kaschita sushuptis tasto vasana matrata. I'm sorry, I'm bungling up the meter. I will try once again. Yatha kaschit sushuptisto vasana matrata kvachit kinchid duktva chakritva cha na paschodveda kinchana yatha cha madiramatto vadan kurvanna vedave evamesha mahayogi lokayatra bahirgatah kinchit kadachit kurvascha na vijanati tat punah. As someone who is asleep on account of mental impressions alone, saying and doing something sometimes, does not know anything afterwards, and as one intoxicated by spirituous liquor, speaking and doing does not indeed know it. So, this great yogin, gone outside the journey of the world, doing something at some time or other, is not aware of it again.
So the scripture compares the middle class of jnani to someone sleepwalking or a blackout drinker. If you've ever known somebody who's drunk too much, had a blackout, from the next day and say, "Oh, you were hysterical. You took off all your clothes and danced on the pool table in the bar." And they go, "Oh, I did." No knowledge of what they did. So for this middle class of jnanis, they are so unaware of the world because of the thunder of their samadhi. Almost no impressions at all. Now it's interesting, going back to the great saint, Anandamayi Ma. She had no disciples because she did not teach. She had devotees, but no disciples. Very interesting. Next one.
प्रारब्धवासनाभ्यां तु सदेहो निर्वहेत् सदा यस्तु तमः सुविज्ञानी देहस्तस्यापि नास्ति हि व्यवहारं करोत्येष रथसारथिवत् स्थितः. But that body can carry on always through prarabdha karma or past actions which have begun to bear fruit in the current life and former mental impressions. There is indeed no body also for him who is the foremost sage, possessed of knowledge. This one performs his actions remaining like a charioteer driving a chariot.
So the finishing up the teaching on the middle class of jnanis, that person will remain in the body as long as there's prarabdha, living out whatever prarabdha is left, and when that's gone, they die. Now, the highest class of jnanis, their wisdom is also absolutely steady, without effort. They never identify with the body. But because of the subtlety of their intellects, they've had no need to destroy the mind through tapas. These are those who are functioning in the world. Of course, someone like King Janaka, modern example is Swami Chinmayananda. Traveling around the world 365 days a year. And his jnana yajnas, his sacrifices to knowledge, his camps. And writing 40 books. And answering personally every letter written to him. No foreign letters. And founding schools, hospitals, seminaries, training for sannyasis, microeconomies for women at risk, involving himself in government. He's an advisor to several presidents in India, prime ministers. But if you were around him and you could tune to him, just empty. So this is the kind of person that this scripture extols as the highest. Going on.
Yatha rathena vyaparam kurvanna ratadehaka sarathi syadevameva deha vyapara tatparaha na dehinapi vyapari shuddha samvedanatmakaha. Performing his action by means of his chariot, as he is not one having the chariot as his body, and can only be a charioteer. So also he, the foremost sage, who is wholly engaged in the actions of the body, is neither the possessor of the body, nor one who acts. He is the nature of pure consciousness.
So that person of the highest wisdom, the highest order of jnana, is absolutely still, actionless in the midst of action, neither identifying with the body nor identifying with the doer and the experiencer. The Master Jesus talked about it this way: I of myself do no thing. It is the Father within that doeth the work. Like a clear lens, and the Shakti and the wisdom and the action just pours through. This is the highest wisdom, according to this text. Any thoughts? Going on.
Antaratya suswanto bahirvyaharatyaso yatha striveshito natye dvairupyamupasangatah. That foremost sage acts externally with his mind perfectly of the nature of the pure self internally, as a man who is dressed as a woman in a dramatic performance has got duality of form.
So here, even though inside he's completely still, completely quiet, outside he may or she may look like every other person acting in the world. And the metaphor here is, I don't know enough about Indian theater customs, but were women not allowed to perform on the stage?
In some states, in more traditional forms of Natya Shastra, yeah.
And certainly in the West, like in Shakespeare, all the women were played by young men. So here the idea is you play the part of a woman even though you actually are a man. So you play the part of a bogey, an enjoyer in the world. You play the part of a doer, but inside, empty, empty. No identification with any of it. Now, again, this is one of the marks of the person of steady wisdom, the Jivan Mukta. This is not for us to be judging other people. This is to be checking out our own steadiness, our own wisdom. And to help us root out any romantic or false ideas that we may have about what self-realization is. Again, my summary: don't worry too much about whether you're meeting some criterion enumerated in a book. Do you know who you are? Do you clearly grasp the fundamental unreality of the phenomenal world? Do you know where happiness is? Can you, to some degree, revel in your own self-nature? These are the things I would recommend you focus on. This other stuff, these categories, don't worry about it. one book has 3, another one may have 6. Not a big deal. All right, going on.
यथा क्रीडन् कुमारेण प्रौढस्तदोषवर्जितः एवमेष जगत्क्रीडा तत्परो निर्मलाशयः. As an adult, playing with a boy is destitute of the defects of the play, like joy or sorrow due to victory or defeat in the play. So this foremost sage, who is wholly engaged in the play of the world, has a pure heart.
Yes. So if you're playing army soldiers with a young person, oh, you've killed my general. Oh, you can do that sort of thing. Or cops and robbers, or cowboys and Indians, and bang, bang, bang. Oh, I'm shot. You play at it. So also the person of wisdom plays at this world. Be careful that we don't take this teaching and use it to justify bad behavior and our own perhaps dark side that we haven't really dealt with. I have seen more than one yogi get him or herself into a lot of trouble, fooling themselves. Oh, I'm just not controlling anymore. I'm acting spontaneously. Next thing you know, there's a whole trail of people they've hurt because of their bad behavior around sex, or they get caught up in drugs and alcohol. I start making up stories. Oh, it doesn't matter because it's not real. Be very careful. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
I guess I have a question.
Yes.
What is good behavior then if everything is unreal? In any transactional relationship?
Well, it depends on from what level you're looking at it. So let's say there's a fellow and he behaves in an abusive way towards a woman. From her viewpoint, she probably shouldn't have gotten involved with him. She had her eyes wide open. In the end, prarabdha. But from the absolute, it's all the play, the infinite. The yogi has no morality from the sense that, oh, society says I should do this, religion says I should do this. There's an internally derived ethics for the yogi that's rooted in this deep experience that I and my fellow human being are one. You just don't do things to other people that hurt them. Now, oftentimes we do things that hurt people, which is different than doing things to hurt them. There can be misunderstandings. We make mistakes. Did that make sense?
Yeah. But so I love that you said the yogi has no morality and it comes from an inner personal ethics where you recognize the other as the
As
same as you.
yourself?
So then the victim can have no blame for the abuser.
Well, this is hard teaching. The victim has drawn the abuse ultimately because of their own karma.
So what would an enlightened victim do?
An enlightened person would probably, well, let me give you an example. So in the story Les Miserables, when Jean Valjean's a thief and he goes into the cathedral and he steals the candelabra, what does the priest do? He's victimized. He's been robbed. He gives him the other candelabra. Now, in a relationship, say an intimate relationship, a person of wisdom would probably say, you just don't treat people like that. You're in it. Are you done? You see the difference? They don't take any of it on. Now, it's probably unlikely that an enlightened person would be punched out or something like that. It could happen. Maybe they were a prize fighter in another life. I don't know. But when we are victimized, there's a piece of us that opens and lets that in through our ignorance, through our ignorance. So if a woman stays in a relationship with an abusive man, she's probably a fool. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's easy for her to get out. And she may have all sorts of ideas like, I married him, I want to try to make this work, it used to be so good, maybe he'll change, which is the stupidest thing in the world. You can never change other people. Or maybe she has a broken picker. Maybe she comes from a family where there's an abusive father. And unconsciously she recreates that. All sorts of things that can happen.
It would take so much for that clockwork, for that one stuck wheel to break out of the big machinery and gear system.
For a person of wisdom, it's very clear really quickly because they stand back and they can see. They can see what's going on.
Thank you.
We should never beat ourselves up for poor decisions we've made. It's pointless, first of all. The shoulda, woulda, coulda is pointless. Don't should on yourself. We did what we did with the understanding that we had. So where you are today, or where a woman would be today after several years of yoga, may not be the way she behaved a decade ago. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But as we start radiating peace, as we start radiating love, and acceptance and authenticity. We tend not to draw people like that into our sphere to the same degree. You might have an experience that you meet some person and they're really attractive. And then all of a sudden they open their mouth. Oh my God, this person's got problems. You've got, well, I don't have the best picker in the world, but you at least have enough awareness to say, maybe I can be helpful to you. I'm not getting in a relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But when we're younger and we're more naive and more subjective and our self-esteem is lower, our values are different, it's hard. Now, I've known people, I'm thinking of one fellow, I'm not going to mention his name, never met him, do not have his darshan, but he is a well-known teacher. And he got into a lot of trouble because he was sexually involved with the students. Now, I have no moral judgment on sexual encounters in general. I just don't. But if you get sexually involved with your students, it's messy. It confuses them and it hurts them. And it's a power dynamic, which is unhealthy. I mean, it seems obvious, but we hear about it all the time. Ministers, politicians, stuff like that, I mean, I say, if you're looking for a guru, 3 things watch out for. If they want to have sex with you, they want all your money, or they want to control your life. They want to do any of those things, run the other way. And if you're with a teacher and one of those things comes up, just laugh in their face and say, what are you, nuts? That makes sense. Anybody out there in Zoom land have any thoughts or questions?
No thoughts, Jim, but it's a very fascinating conversation. And one hears of these kind of cases far too often.
Swamiji used to say, the longer the beard, the greater your mistrust should be. All right, next verse.
Madhyajnani nirodhasya prakarshena achala sthitihi achala sthitire tasya vicharasya prakarshatah. The middling sage, possessed of knowledge, has an immovable state of the mind due to the intensity of his restraint. The immovable state of the mind of this sage is due to the intensity of his investigation, leading to absorption in the self.
Yes. So, due to the intensity of his tapas, the intensity of his vichara, he has removed all the extroversions of the mind. The mind then stays intensely engaged in samadhi. And we hear stories about sage so and so was engaged in samadhi for 12 years and da 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 da. And if your mind is drawn to turn inward with that kind of devotion and love, you just can't help it. Knock yourself out. The body will be taken care of. Don't worry about it. Next one.
Buddhaistu paripakena madhyamottamayorvida atra te shrinu vakshami samvadam jnani nirmitaha. The difference between the middling and the highest sages is due to the maturity of the intellect. In this matter, I shall tell you the conversation between two sages mutually.
Okay, so meaning the maturity or the subtlety of the intellect. So now we're going to get a story to illustrate it. Going on.
Purahi purvate shobha. Purahi purvate shobhut. Raja Ratnangada Havaya Savipashamanupuri Madhyasida Mritabhidam. In former times, there was a king called Ratnangada who was the ruler of a mountainous region. He lived in a city named Amrita on the bank of the Vipasha river.
So once upon a time, there was a king. Going on.
Tasya putro mahatmano sthitavati manishino rukamanga dahe mangado janakasya tivallabho. He had two sons named Rukmangada and Hemangada, who were noble, extremely intelligent, and very dear to their father.
Going on.
Tatra Rukmangado Yasi Shastranam Paradarshanaha Hemangado Tivigyani Jnaninamuttamo Bhavat. Among them, Rukmangada was one who had completely mastered the scriptures. Hemangada was exceedingly wise and was the foremost of sages possessed of knowledge.
So we have two dudes. One is well versed in the scriptures, but the other one is a man of wisdom, of realization. Let's see, going on.
Tavu bho nirgato sarva senabhi parivarito mrigayartham vasanteshu yayaturgahanam vanam. Both of them went out of the city, surrounded by all the armies for the purpose of hunting in the spring season, and proceeded to a deep forest.
So once again, we get a story about two princes going hunting in the forest. Going on.
Tatranekana mriganam vyagran shashkana mahishanapi hatvatyanta parishranta vasadya hridamastitau. There, having hunted many deer, tigers, hares, and buffaloes, being extremely tired and reaching a deep lake, they remained there.
So after having their safari, they go off to this place by a lake.
Jim, I just have a comment. I find it very, very hilarious that a person can be described as being exceedingly wise and the foremost of sages, and yet would hunt all these animals.
I get it.
I
Now,
totally agree.
understand that up until very recently, royal sages would even eat meat. And if you look back into the earliest Vedic rites, they included animal sacrifice by the priests. If you look at Chandogya Upanishad, the whole first part of it is about the Ashwamedha, the horse
Right.
sacrifice. I'm not making this up. It's scripture.
No, I
Have
believe
you
you.
ever, have you ever Wikipedia'd the horse sacrifice and what it is?
Yes, actually, you told us about it in the previous class. It's quite
It's pretty raunchy,
yes, it's
but a
quite something.
lot of animals get killed.
Right. I mean, it's one
And-
thing to eat meat, but I mean, to hunt for sport is taking it to another level, right?
Well, you know, I didn't write the scripture, and 1,000 years ago, and especially they're kshatriyas, they're not brahmins, and that was part of the culture. No one thought hunting for sport was a bad thing in those days. Now, when we have the destruction of so much habitat, and I can't remember it, I think they say something like 75 species a day go extinct because of human habitation destruction. You know, we're a pretty nasty species in a lot of ways. So we have a different frame of reference now. Also, all those kings back in those days had a whole gaggle of wives. We don't do that anymore either, that I know of. There are a lot of things that change with culture. I don't know if that answered your question.
Sure. I mean, it's just a funny comment.
No, and I think our understanding of the health benefits of a vegetarian diet, at least, and some people a vegan diet. I mean, there's a lot of deeper understanding. But you know, young men hunt for sport. That's what they did. They did it in India, they did it in Europe up to maybe 50, 60 years ago. They'd certainly have these hunting things back in under the British Raj. Now, was it a British influence, you know, or was it something that was older and part of the indigenous understanding? This scripture tends to say it was there. I didn't write the scripture, I'm sorry. Going on.
Tatkradasya pare pare nyagrodhe brahma rakshasah samasta shastra saraksho with pig birba with sorry, this is a very complex word. With Vidatyalama. On the further shore of that lake, on a fig tree, the ghost of a Brahmana or a Brahma Rakshasa, knowing the essence of all scriptures, used to dispute very much with scholars.
Oh, so this is a very funny story. I had forgotten this one. So we have the ghost of a Brahmin. Brahmana Rakshasa. He's a demon Brahmana. How can you be a Brahmin and a demon? That's even worse than going and killing animals. So how did he get there? And what's he going to do? Now, mind you, even though he's a demon, he is well versed in the scriptures. and loves debate. All right. I think this is a good place to stop.
What a cliffhanger.
Come back next week, same bat time, same bat channel. Find out what happens to our two young princes as they encounter the demon Brahman. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Guru Namaha. Hari Om. Oh, that's it. But it is interesting to look up Ashwamedha, the horse sacrifice, on Wikipedia and see what was involved with it. That's just one of the sacrifices.
I'll check it out now that you say so.
And I have been told by scholars that in the Vedic period, the early Vedic period, prior to Buddhism, Brahmins ate meat. And that there's scriptural reference to that. I do not know that for a fact by my own study, but I've been told that.
So they used to, I mean, at least for goddess worship, one of like for Kali, they make offerings of lamb and meat and wine.
And then do they actually consume
Yeah,
it?
yeah. It's distributed as prasad.
All right. Hari Om.
Thank you, Jim. Bye bye.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Deepa. Good night.
Thanks, Deepa. Bye.